Roll call.
Ready. Representative Henderson. Representative Larson.
Here.
Representative Sherwood. Representative Stith. Representative Walters.
Here.
Representative Swanitzer.
Here.
Chairman Nicholas.
Let's just take some numeric. Okay, now we'll do number 4 first. You want to have number 4? Medicaid 12-month postpartum expansion. All we're doing obviously is dealing with the financial component to it. But Dan, you want to just give us a quick synopsis of the bill and what it does?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Committee Appropriations. Nice to see you all this year. House Bill 4 was an interim joint labor bill. And basically it allows, as I think everyone on this committee is aware, that Medicaid has not been denied to anyone during the COVID pandemic. It is slated to be ratcheted down starting in April. One of the benefits of that program, when it comes to women who give birth, historically, they've had about 60 days or 2 months post-birth to be on Medicaid. The child is obviously on Medicaid for that first full year. The federal government has allowed states to take the opportunity to extend Medicaid for 1 year for mothers as well as the children. And so the Joint Labor Committee, which I was not on, brought this bill before us, which extends that coverage. And so that's the philosophy behind it. It's the federal government, holding out a carrot to see if we jump on it. And our committee said we will pursue this. You will see in our fiscal note, there was apparently a miss, we'll just call it that. When they did the fiscal appropriation, they did a 2-year fiscal appropriation, and what we're asking is only a 1 year. And so you'll see there is a standing committee amendment from the House Labor Committee that did divide that number in half. Again, this is 1.9 from the state, 1.9 for a federal match. Certainly departments here as well as other interested people, but that's the philosophy and mechanics behind the bill. Your Labor Committee voted 5-4 to bring it to the floor to discuss this policy option, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Chairman, please. Go ahead.
So, Chairman Swanitzer, I guess I'm a little confused. When you said that the feds are holding out a carrot, this is something that we could have always done. We could have always expanded. We determined how long we was going to cover postpartum coverage, but during the health emergency, the feds enhanced reimbursement for Medicaid coverage up to 56%. So everybody that was on there had to stay on there through the duration of that. And so by virtue of that, and seeing the impacts, the positive impacts or on women in postpartum coverage, the question was then, should we extend that coverage further than the current 60 days, which is in our state Medicaid plan? Is that fair?
Mr. Chairman, Vice Chairman Larson, I think that's fair with the possible exception on we know the outcomes if it's a beneficial program and really saving lives. I do think that was the testimony. If we had a couple more years of data by extending this, we could really save solid benefits to this program. I think early estimates say there is, but we certainly would need maybe a couple more years of data to fully say this is a benefit to Wyoming, and it's certainly worth the cost.
Thank you.
Further questions for Dan? Any other public comment? Is there any public? Please. One of them.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted the committee to understand some of the testimony that we heard during the Labor Health Committee on this particular bill to get an idea. And I wanted you to be aware that you probably are aware already that this Medicaid coverage is not just for things that happen related to pregnancy. This coverage extends 10 months, full Medicaid coverage. So the question was asked, does it cover a broken leg? And the answer was yes, it covers a broken leg too. So we're extending that Medicaid coverage full healthcare coverage for that full period of time. The burden that the state bears for that full coverage is 50% of the costs. So I just want to make sure that the committee understands, my opinion with, I voted against the amendment on this because frankly, I think that we're completely underestimating. For instance, I have forgive the bit of a personal reference, but I currently have a sister who has been in the hospital since Christmas. She gave birth to her third child 9 months ago. She would fall, if she were under Medicaid, she would fall in this category. And so the expenses that are being incurred in her condition, and it could be, for anybody. I mean, it's going to be, 6 figures or more for her healthcare. So anyway, I just wanted to make sure the committee understood that. It seemed like when the fiscal note came through, the divisor that they used for the amount of people, 1,200 and 1,250 people on this plan, roughly $200 and some per person per month. Just to me, it seems way lower. Any additional burden that will be required to come out of the health department's own budget, which is a big budget, as you know, but just wanted the committee to be aware of that and the possibility of this is an ongoing expense, ongoing ask for the state if this bill is passed. So that this will be an ongoing appropriations every year for this coverage, and it could be large, quite large. Thank you.
Please.
So then Representative, I think with the example that you use, which I think is a good one, fortunately, it sounds like your sister had the ability to cover those costs, if I'm seeing that accurately. And so what about somebody that falls into the category of not having those resources? How do they pay for it?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So that's my point, is that anybody that falls within this Medicaid coverage, regardless of the medical condition, I just want to make sure that it's understood that if there's a major health problem, major health thing, a surgery or whatever that is, they would be covered under this coverage. And I just want to make sure that, the $1.9 million appropriation for 1,200 people covering their health care, any number of things could go wrong. And, so I think not that their numbers were a guess, because I think they had some, 2 years worth of data to back it up. But I just want the committee to be aware that if anything, I would think that the appropriation for this bill is low.
Well,
This go ahead, Steph. Go ahead, Steph.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Stephen Johansson, Director for the Department of Health. None of the previous comments or speakers are inaccurate. Just wanted to provide some additional clarification. Sorry, Mr. Chairman, is that better? This opportunity, so to speak, just to provide a little bit of history, what is now offered from CMS is the ability to extend postpartum coverage for 1 year without a waiver. So to Representative Larson's previous comment that we could have always extended this coverage, that's true, but with a waiver mechanism that is, as you all know, has some different bells and whistles and strings attached to it. This is just the ability to extend this coverage from 60 days to a year through what we call a state plan amendment. And so to speak to the cost a little bit, we had as you've heard me say before in our budget hearing, we had a somewhat of a unique opportunity to give you all better information on what the cost and enrollment would look like because of what Chairman Zwanitzer mentioned during the pandemic. We have been disallowed from disenrolling members from Medicaid that would otherwise be ineligible. By nature of that, we've been able for the past 2.5 years or so to study this particular group, pregnant women who then have postpartum coverage, and get a better sense than we normally would have of what that enrollment and cost would look like. To address the comments about potential, additional or extreme cases that have large expenditures, absolutely true. We see that in Medicaid all the time with neonatal intensive care, complications with pregnancy, surgeries, et cetera. What we've done here with the estimates we provided is it's really smoothed out over time. So there's variability in those per member per month costs, depending on the case, depending on the member, depending on their particular needs or conditions. But we're pretty comfortable with the cost here because after pregnancy, which is currently covered for this group. So as a reminder, this doesn't expand the coverage beyond the 154% federal poverty level that our pregnant women group is set at now. It just extends the time. So during the postpartum period, we typically see a pretty dramatic reduction in that group on per member per month costs from over $1,000 a month, as you might imagine, with issues related to pregnancy, the delivery costs, hospital costs, et cetera, to kind of a smoothing over that time period of about $250 per month, per member per month. Within that time period, will we have, if the legislature chooses to move this forward, would we have cases that are far exceeding that? Yes. And we'll have cases that far, that do not even reach $250 per member per month. So I'm pretty comfortable as your health department director saying that pretty confident that those numbers will pan out just because we've had that lived experience for the past two or 3 years to really study that. But as was mentioned, and this was my testimony at the Labor Committee as well, as you all know, we don't have the ability within Medicaid to say, we just won't pay those bills. If someone's eligible, receives a qualifying service, we pay the bill. So any addition that would come, we see more utilization than we projected in our fiscal note or in our analysis. Then obviously we come back to the legislature and say, hey, enrollment has gone higher than we expected, or costs are higher than we expected, or as has been the case, especially over the past couple of years, expenditures are lower than we expected. That's what led to a lot of our department reversions over the past couple of years that we funded a variety of efforts with. Because quite frankly, during the pandemic, Wyoming members, unlike other states, we didn't see that enhanced utilization that the current enhanced match from the feds was intended to fund. So, Mr. Chairman, that's really just a little bit of background, but happy to answer any questions the committee might
So
have.
Stefan, I think it would be useful if this passes for you to provide us with occasional updates to see how well you forecast.
Mr. Chairman, as always, happy to do that. And my human calculator sitting behind me will just put it squarely at his responsibility if this were to go under or over the projections, but more than happy to. It would be part of our general reporting anyways. We track this actually weekly and monthly, so I'm more than happy to provide that information.
Okay, further questions for Stefan? Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I wondered if you could give us an estimate, please, if you have it, just a round number. How many mothers, pregnant mothers, have been helped in Wyoming over the last year or so through this?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Henderson, so typically I'll say pre-pandemic, we would see around 1,500 or 2,000 members in our pregnant women category at any given time. Obviously, during the pandemic, without the ability to disenroll members after that postpartum 60-day period ends, which we would typically have done, we've seen that grow to around 3,000 to 4,000. And so we anticipate if the legislature moved this forward on any given month, we would see approximately 1,250 additional members in any given month in the pregnant women category.
Did you forecast in that the pandemic baby boom?
Mr. Chairman, I missed that. Sorry.
Okay, further questions for Stefan? Any other public comment? Seeing none, we'll close public comment. We have a motion. Mr. Chairman, go ahead.
Before we do, so Representative Fornok, new guy, way to go. Thank you for coming and before the committee and sharing your thoughts on the bill. Well done.
Mr. Chairman, move the bill do pass.
Moved by Representative Walters, seconded by Representative Henderson. Discussion. Any discussion? Seeing none, roll call.
Representative Henderson. Representative Larson.
Aye.
Representative Sherwood. Representative Stith.
Aye.
Representative Walters.
Aye.
Representative Swanitzer.
Aye.
Chairman Nicholas.
Aye. Thanks, Ben. Okay, number 11 is next on the list. State Parks Rangers retirement. We'll do 14. 14's on the list. Sure. Civil case fees amendments. Art, just give us a synopsis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. So House Bill 14 is one of those fee increase bills. We've in the last few years been trying to catch up a number of our different filing fees for different things up to a rate that is consistent with inflation. And that's what this bill is intended to do. It raises the case filing fees in civil lawsuits. Presently set at $120 one-time original filing fee. This will increase it to a one-time filing fee of $160. The Wyoming Supreme Court estimates about 9,700 such filings every year. And these fees will go to the county general fund, paid to the district court when the fees are then transferred to the counties. So when we looked at our neighboring states, a number of them have significantly higher filing fees for their civil lawsuits. And many of them also have additional fees that are charged for different supplemental filings as a lawsuit proceeds through their court system that Wyoming does not. As an impact to our public, the $160 filing fee is minuscule compared to the other costs associated with filing a civil lawsuit, paying your attorneys, hiring expert witnesses, all the rest of those sorts of things. So the filing fee is really a minimal part of all of that. That's about all I have to offer.
Art, you don't
unless
mind
there's
if we change line 7, page 2 to $50 versus $40, would you?
Yeah, what happened there is you're correct. It increases the, I'll let Representative Craig go explain that. He's ready to.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
I'm going to bypass your question and just go, I want to add a little context to the explanation by the good chairman. So in probate, we have a different filing fee. Under any cases filed in probate court, they are already set at the $160. And really, I believe this, when we changed the filing fees a few years back, I think this was a bit of an oversight. We intended for them to go up together, but because of the difference in how the two statutes are written and how the fees are actually laid out within the two different statutes, we ended up with differing amounts because of the fees that you are referencing, Mr. Chairman, within the bottom part of this bill. And so what has been happening is, for example, guardianships and conservatorships. There's differing opinions across the counties on whether those count as probate or whether those count as civil. And so different counties require different filing fees. And so what we're trying to do is do two things. One, probably fix the mess up that occurred years ago when we raised these the last time, and it was unintentional. So we're trying to bring those two fees together so that when people also don't have to choose, as we move to more online filing, we use e-filing system, that there isn't this discrepancy. Oh, am I filing a probate or am I filing a civil? There's not that choice. It's just those fees are uniform across the board for all types of cases. And that's what we're trying to do.
Suggesting on the probate, we do the 40-10 as well. The 160.
Mr. Chairman, that's already in there for the probate, and that's part of the problem. If you go pull up the statute, what it's I think 401, thank you. It's already set out that way, and it's delineated much more clearly within the probate statute than it is within this particular statute, and that's part of the problem that we're also trying to fix.
That's probably our fault.
No comment, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman,
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Chairman Washit, the state pays this or files these on occasion. What's the cost to the state going to be? Because we're also, as I said, expected to pay them when we file Department of Family Services or other agencies.
You know, it's always hard to project into the future what those exact fees are going to be, but we did grant through a committee amendment a delay so that the state agencies who have legal filings in our court system will not absorb this impact until July 1, 2024. Thus, they can build this into their budget as they go forward.
Mr. Chairman,
Representative Stiff.
so Chairman Washit, does that mean that private parties will be paying 160, but state agencies will be paying 120 for some period of time? So the state will pay less than the average Joe?
Yes, that's what that means. Partly because of the budget process that state agencies go through, that other parties to litigation probably do not. So the state agencies have to prepare their budgets based upon anticipated costs and known costs. And that's what our state agencies have done. They won't have an opportunity to make those adjustments on the fly as this bill goes into effect.
We could have looked at their standard budget request for that component and adjusted accordingly and put it in the supplemental budget as part of your fiscal note, right?
You're probably more knowledgeable about all that financial maneuvering than I am, but this was the request of those state agencies because their budgets were already set.
Follow up. So as those state agency made those comments, Mr. Chairman, did they indicate what it was what the cost might look like? You know, they have an average number of filings estimated each year to where they would know what.
It's estimated in their budgets. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Walters, I believe that they had a fiscal note prepared for that, but I don't think we actually got to see that prior to the meeting, but they did tell us they had prepared one.
So regardless, we could fix that either on the supplemental budget. Yeah, if we choose to do it. Or we can do it next year. Okay, any other questions? Any public comment? Close public comment.
Move the bill.
Moved by Representative Larson, seconded by Representative Walters. Discussion on the bill. Seeing none, roll call.
Representative Henderson. Representative Larson.
Aye.
Representative Sherwood. Aye. Representative Stith.
Aye.
Representative Walters. Representative Zwanitzer.
Aye.
Chairman Nicholas.
Aye. Okay, now we'll do House Bill 11, State Parks Retirement. Think we have anybody here to present Art? I think appropriations should have a rule that if it's under $10,000, we don't have to do it. Go ahead, please proceed, Art.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bring you today House Bill 11, State Park Rangers Retirement. In summary, quick overview is a few years back, the director of our state parks moved and they passed changes that would include the full-time state park rangers into the death and disability section of our retirement. And the assumption was made that that made them all part of their law enforcement retirement plan, and it did not. And so when the director discovered that, in fact, the full-time state park rangers who are fully post-certified law enforcement officers that do everything that every other law enforcement officer in the state, all those duties that they perform, so do our rangers. So when that was discovered that they were not participants in our law enforcement retirement plan, but rather part of the big plan for all other state employees, the decision was made to request that they properly be moved into that employee group insurance that better reflects their actual status compared to the other members of the general pension plan. So there are 5 full-time state park rangers, 4 of whom will likely transfer into this law enforcement plan if they can. The bill provides for a carve out for those who are situated such that it would be in their best financial interest to remain in the large employee plan. And those other 4 will move into the state law enforcement plan. So the costs you see associated with this reflect the difference between what these individuals have been paying into the state plan versus what they will be, or what we have been paying on behalf of these employees into the state plan versus what we will need to pay into the law enforcement plan. With me today is our chief park ranger, as well as the representatives of the Wyoming retirement system, who will be much more articulate in being able to answer any questions specific to those changes.
Any questions? Representative Swanson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, when you mentioned the fact that 4 of them will move over to the other plan, do they still have the choice if they want to or not? I mean, it makes it obviously logical sense if they would, but for whatever reason, if they decide that there's some reason they don't want to, it is still their choice.
There is a provision for them to opt out, but it's a one-time deal. You can't be flopping back and forth.
Further questions? Seeing none, any public comment? Close public comment. The motion on the bill. Will do pass by Representative Walters, seconded by Representative Henderson. Discussion. Roll call.
Representative Henderson, Representative Larson, Representative Sherwood, Representative Stith,
Aye.
Representative Walters, Representative Swanitzer,
Aye.
Chairman Nicholas.
Aye. Okay, someone want to jump out in the hall and grab Harshman? Next, we've got 988 suicide prevention. Don't forget my bike back. I'm on a mission. Not out there? I'll call him. So while he's gone, all those in favor say aye. Sure. Yeah. Where'd you guys get lunch? Ooh, close. Oh, in the extension. I'm in a hurry. Okay, we're live. Here we go. Wherever you want to sit. You can come sit here in Lloyd's seat if you want.
Printed off the statute and went through there and just kind of scratched on those a little bit, but you can see, Mr. Chairman, the Public TV Trust about 2010. You need,
Hold on.
I won't speak till you're ready to go.
Oh, we're ready. Go ahead.
You ready, Mr. Chairman? Can I speak?
You ready?
Members, this handout I just gave you, it's kind of funny, you know, the ebbs and flows of the legislature. In the 70s, it was an attempt to trust fund everything, right? We were trying to, and of course, the big one was the permanent trust fund. And I mean, this happens on every issue. There's ebbs and flows. Trust funds used to be the rage, right? And then now we've seemed to have some idea that we don't want to save that money and just put everything into one big pot. And there's some folks think like that. I just want to show you some of these examples of trust funds that we have done. Our predecessors, some of them are quite new. Public television was about 2010. Wyoming Tobacco Trust Fund, I was on this committee when we really saved that fund and turned it into a trust fund because it was just cash from the federal government. It was getting spent faster. And so we turned that into a trust fund. And you see the dollars and appropriate out of that every year for the Department of Health. The Transportation Trust Fund, this is in the 1990s. A lot of senior buses come out of that, 22 million. Children's Trust Fund, this is an older one too. It's more DFS type, you know, for kids who are in need. That CapCon account is probably my 5th biggest mistake in the legislature, but anyway, moving on. This emergency water you just established like a year or two ago. That's a little trust fund. The fair endowment, we established that in 2018 for state fair. Military assistance we did. I was in the legislature. I think I'm the only one in the House that was in the legislature when that was established after all the Gulf Wars and returning service members. So that was established in 2005 to aid not only the veterans, but their families. The Wildlife Natural Resources Trust was probably, you know, and I remember when this was under Governor Friedenthal, so it was probably, I was on TRW when we did it. It's my first session, so I think it was 03 or 04. And that had been a dream of the legislature since the 70s. That's Deemer True. All these guys came back and testified back in 2004, but they ran out of money. And so when we got the early Jonah gas boom and then the coal bed methane, the goal was 200 million. We put 105 or something initially, and you guys just added to that. It's up to 187 million now. We just put some money in that. So that was established. I didn't write that date, but it's 2004. That one's a little different too. You know, it's got an independent board. You guys see the money goes, and you could probably reach into it and mess around with it. But it's different than like Tobacco Trust Fund, where you see that dollars and you appropriate out of the Tobacco Trust Fund. Emergency responders, we just set that up in 2020 as a trust fund. Doesn't have much money in it yet, but, and you know, you see what emergency responders have been going through in Wyoming. We've had one killed just in the last month. And so it's to try to support those folks who volunteer. The cultural trust fund, you've got in your budget to add 8 million to that, to move it to 25 million. That's been around for a little while. And of course, cultural events provide grants around the state for concerts and arts, fine and performing arts. And then, of course, this game and fish fund is a constitutional fund. I know when I sat in these chairs, we popped 5 million more into that account. It's probably been 6, 7 years ago. We saved 5 million into that. It's kind of goes back to admission times where we have these fish hatchery state lands. Those are still out there generating revenue for that and for that trust fund. And then this education trust fund, and that's an older one too, it's more for innovation, where that child or where that other trust fund up above is more of a DFS focus. This one is more innovation and education at the district level. So this is an example of some of these trust funds that we have out there to fund ongoing, efforts by the state to serve our citizens. So anyway, I just want to basically, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate your giving me the take to just share that with all of you. This isn't the first time and it won't be the last time, and it is a good idea. And I think, and how blessed we are to fight about how we're going to save money. So this is a way to save money. And then, Mr. Chairman, we had, I don't know, 40, 50 people testify on this bill. We did this one bill for 2 hours. Had a couple people we had like 3 people opposed. Didn't want the trust fund, but didn't want the 988. But everybody else there was wildly supportive of it. This is a revenue bill, was assigned to us by management council. We could raise a phone tax. The trust fund idea, or you just put it and let it ride with the general fund like everything else in the Department of Health. And so we thought there was 189 suicides last year in Wyoming. And we show you, and they've showed us all in our revenue meetings, and we saw it again in our hearing here a couple of days ago. It's estimated economic impact of each suicide in Wyoming is 1.3 million. So that's 35 lives that will fully, on that, we can save 35 people. That funds this trust fund. And so I think the other part of this is you're going to see it. It's going to be like the tobacco trust fund. It's not going to an independent board. Right now, it costs about $700,000 to run these call centers, but the idea then is to incorporate these crisis response teams. When you call, most of this stuff, a lot of it suicide. When I first started teaching, you never said the word suicide. It was taboo. Don't even say it because you don't want to give anybody the idea. Couldn't even talk about it. Now we talk about it because we know most of it. Put your hand on somebody's shoulder. Really. And get them through that first part. So that's all we're trying to do is get this thing, and then we can move on, and it's not gonna, when the next downturn comes, and literally, I'm talking to people in Casper to send their parents to Nebraska, for care in homes that are closing in Wyoming because of our budget cuts. This will still keep going. And as well as anybody, a couple of you have been through this recent downturn. It's tough. And so anyway, that's all we're trying to do. And I think as much as anything, it's a beautiful way to save money. It'll be there forever. And if 30 years from now, there is no 988, we don't need it or whatever, the legislature can change it and grab any money in there and put it to some other purpose. So it's not a constitutional inviolate fund like Herman Mill Trust Fund, Common School, or the Hathaway and Wyoming's Tomorrow. Those are constitutionally protected. These are statutory. So I'm done. Thanks.
Mr. Chairman, just walk us through the amounts.
Okay.
Fiscal notes on the back.
Bill. Do you have a copy, Bill? I can just.
Here.
You bet. So we're here to talk about the amounts. And you can see, let's go back here to section 3 of the bill, page 15. Mr. Chairman. So the 40 million from the LSRA then to this account, and then the 6 million is just what we've been working on, and CapFin is the 5X. So if you take 40 million and we figure 2% on dividends and interest, so take 40 millions times 3% and then take it times 5 years, right? So 40 million times 3% times 5 gives you the 6 million 5X reserve account. So then it too can be invested for total rate of return and grow. So that's what we're trying to do there. That's where the numbers come from, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Swanson. Questions?
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Hartzman, I'm wondering about, this is a national number. And is there any chance that the National Suicide Foundation or the federal government will chip in? And as you know, we have another famous number, 911. And to the best of my knowledge, there's no state money that goes into it, that it all comes on user fees. So do you see anything in the near future that the feds might come in and cough up a little bit of the money? Or was there any talk of that in the committee? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Swanser, there certainly was. In fact, it is currently funded with ARPA dollars. That's how we have funded it. There was a proposal to put a big chunk of money into this, was stripped out. And so there right now is no national type money to do this. And this is moving now. These are state-based call centers. So these are people in Wyoming when they call. They're not going to be routed to Tennessee or wherever, as currently is the case.
Mr. Chairman, 2 questions. One is, do you mind walking through the reserve account calculation amount, and how you got to that? You said it, but I just didn't catch it all.
Craig forecast 2% dividends and interest. Right. So that's so then that, and it's actually going to get a little higher. But what we've been working on in CapFin is off of that 2%. It's 2.14 is what it's been forever. So take the 3% then, that is investment earnings that are going to be needed to fill as 5% spending. So you take the 40 million times 3% times 5 years, and that gives you the 5X reserve account. So then that money, the reserve account is large enough, it can be invested with the corpus for a total rate of return and not sit in cash. So, you know, currently we have basically in all of our trust funds, we have like 2 boxes. You got the corpus and you got the reserve account. This one's invested for total rate of return. This one is much smaller, is invested in liquid investments. Okay, and so, and we know, you know, in CapFin, we know that number is about 100 million a year in opportunity lost. And this isn't to increase spend. This is to increase the size of the corpus, to keep growing the corpus, right? And so that's all we're trying to do here is, if we make this box larger, now it can be invested similar to the corpus in a total rate of return. I don't think I'm supposed to use props, and do a total rate of return, and then go from 4.5% to probably 6.5% return. And then that fills back into the corpus. So we're trying to do this with all of our funds, you know, as we move forward.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So with the 6 million into the reserve account, is the reserve account, would it be considered an expenditure account to where this program could get started? I see the act is effective immediately, so that reserve account funding would be used immediately to get the program up and running. And then in future years, it would refill and maintain, and the spending policy would be 5% of what's in that reserve account.
Can I phone a friend on this when the federal money runs out? Ms. Somerville, could you let others?
Sure.
You guys I think we have plenty of chairs, but I think
I think it's already funded through,
it is through another year, but I don't want to misspeak. I think it's still funded for one more year. This can sit and get rolling, but. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Walters, it is intended to be funded through ARPA through July 1 of 2024 to finish out the biennium. I think that we may get a few more months of coverage out of that ARPA money as the Department of Health is going through its RFP process, but that's how it's set up right now.
and so part of the pitch on the floor is we're basically using some of our $900 million in excess revenues. Right?
Absolutely. We're finding all kinds of ways to save, and this is a nice little place to save some money. And this isn't, as you know, the only trust fund idea out there.
This is we as in he.
We as in the legislative branch. The House.
Mr. Chairman, it's my understanding that the cost of operating the 988 suicide hotline is about $750,000 a year or thereabouts. This will throw off $2 million a year, so it gives you 1.25 to use for other things, the crisis teams or crisis centers. And my question just is, how do you get to what's the estimate of why it would cost 1.25 to do the crisis teams or crisis centers? Why is it that number instead of some other number?
Mr. Chairman. And Ms. Somerville can, if you're fine with that, can chime in too. I think our thoughts on revenue were, to fund this and these response teams, and then whatever else you think needs funded in this area. And if you have an extra $1 million out of this as appropriators, and there's something in the Department of Health, or you have an extra 500,000 that you want to put it to on a suicide prevention or any other kind of mental health stuff, that's what we were kind of thinking that it would be. We want to fund this 988 Lifeline, the response teams, but I don't know, and Ms. Somerville can add to that, but the idea was then to fund all this tranche of services. Go ahead, Ms. Somerville, if you would.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative Stith. So the initial calculations in terms of what we projected it would run was about 1.2 million to run the actual crisis lines itself per year. That appears to have come in under budget, which is always nice. But in that calculation, in terms of the $2 million in revenue, we are trying to anticipate the growth that's forecasted in the number of these calls. So nationally, since 988 stood up in July, they've seen a 45% increase across the country in people that are dialing 988. We are seeing that growth, not quite at that rate in Wyoming, but we are seeing that growth. More calls the call center operations need to be able to handle that volume. So when we were calculating that initial 1.2 million for just the crisis centers, that was built into that number. The response teams is a fairly new venture for Wyoming. We have had a couple of trial runs in the past, but it was not successful, mostly due to lack of revenue to fund the teams. Is the intent to allow these teams to be built out within each community, utilizing their resources. So there are different law enforcement departments or hospitals or community mental health centers or whatever resources they have in each county. And so the intention in that $2 million is to really give some seed money to get that process started as we continue to look for other ways to bring revenue in to support that.
Okay, further questions?
Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my question goes to the response teams. And I wonder if you could help us understand just sort of a brief scenario of how you would see one of those being deployed and supported, and how the persons involved would maybe be in that. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Henderson, there's many models for that. So I'll give you a couple of quick examples. The first and the lowest cost model in terms of providing a very baseline support is to provide that support to law enforcement officers. They can have an iPad in their vehicle that immediately connects them to a mental health professional that maybe they can consult on the scene for a call that goes into 911 as opposed to 988. In a more kind of maybe a mid-tier Again, dealing with 911 calls initially, because lots of folks call 911 for mental health crisis emergencies. Maybe that looks like having our EMTs, ambulance personnel across the state receive additional mental health training so that they can consult on the scene. We know that in numerous occasions, ambulance or / fire departments respond with police to incidents. In maybe the goal scenario is that in either a 911 or a 988 call, that you would have a team standing by in a county. And again, this is going to look different in every county based on resources, but I'll pick on the community mental health centers because they let me do that. They get a call through one of these lines and there is an incident or something going on that is serious. Law enforcement can be called to the scene, as well as a mobile crisis team that could include a crisis counselor, like a licensed professional counselor or something along those lines to help advise and help de-escalate the situation. The last scenario that I want to give you is one that we're building on right now. So currently in our 988 system, we're doing it very much the Wyoming way, which is if somebody calls and they are not at the level of imminent risk, so they don't need law enforcement on scene, but they need help and they need it now. The goal is to get them into crisis stabilization. So 988 crisis counselors will call community mental health centers or other resources directly. In fact, I will tell the committee that 988 has all of my director's cell phone numbers for community mental health centers to get them to that. And then they'll work with the community mental health center and maybe law enforcement transport or other types of transport to get those folks into crisis right now. So again, lots of different scenarios. That is going to work probably differently in maybe the county that we're in versus maybe a more rural county in the western side of the or in the western side of Wyoming that has fewer people. It's really important to build those at a community level so that we're utilizing that community's resources and their response capabilities and frankly how that county wants to handle it, because you need everybody on board to make that type of response work. Your healthcare staff, your law enforcement, your sheriff, all of those folks need to be on board, and that's the idea.
Further questions? Seeing none, any public comment? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize. I didn't introduce myself for the record. Andy Somerville, Executive Director of the Wyoming Association of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Centers. And I just want to touch on just a couple of things I wanted to share with the committee in terms of how we've been building this program and what it's doing on the ground in terms of the money that's been invested so far. Since the first call center, and I'd remind the committee, we were the last state to get an in-state call center. Since those call centers opened in August of 2020 through October of 22, we have taken more than 8,100 calls from Wyoming residents. That's a lot of people. That's an impressive number. So we do feel that the money is being spent well. In terms of the funding history for this particular service, maybe I shouldn't use the word unfunded mandate, but unfortunately that's what we're looking at. This is a national line. And when we started in Wyoming, we graciously received $400,000 from the legislature for part-time hours. And we've continued to build the program up from there to try to get to that 24/7 coverage. There has been what I would call minuscule money and support from the federal government. There was one $60,000 grant from SAMHSA. There was one $250,000 grant. Wyoming received the bare minimum allocation from the federal government on a one-time appropriation in fiscal year 21. There is conversation about the FY22 appropriation and the priorities that are laid out in that bill. I would fall over personally if we received more than $250,000. There's a number of priorities in that bill that are to implement 988 services on a national scale. There's a line item for veterans. There's a line item for Spanish speaking services. There's a line item for more robustly increasing text and chat communication for youth, et cetera. So I sit here today in full transparency that we don't know that there will be any money. coming from the federal government. Our centers have attempted to, both of the centers have tried to supplement some of the programming with grant funding to add more hours. Those grants are small. We're talking $10,000 or $20,000 when they receive a grant. And of course, that landscape is never very certain as well. So when we brought this service online and worked with the legislature last year to secure the ARPA funding as type of a Band-Aid, the direction that we got and the comments we got back from the legislators was, okay, you have 2 years, please figure out how to fund this going forward. And so we've embarked on that process as was just described by Chairman Harshman. And the committee chose to go with the trust bill instead of the telephone fee bill. And that's kind of what brings us here today. But I just want to end on that stable funding is incredibly important. Whether Wyoming wants it or not, 988 is now the front door for not only suicide issues, but mental health crises. And that's a national campaign. There's already posters up in schools and social services agencies. They're being very robust about their education. It is assumed that 988 will become as common as 911 within a matter of a couple of years. And we're already seeing that in terms of the increase of call volume. It is incredibly important that we keep the front door open so that we can connect people to service. That is our best chance of keeping them going. And the last piece that I want to add in terms of the funding is coming from a community mental health perspective. With the state's rises and falls in revenue, mental health has taken some budget reductions in the past years. I would note for this committee that in 2013, the general fund appropriation for community mental health services was a little over $46 million. In 2022, it's $34 million. And so that is certainly a concern in how we keep a service going and why we're asking for a sustainable revenue source.
Mr. Chairman, and this goes more to the merits of the program rather than to the funding. But while you're here, I just thought I'd ask, right now under our current 988 call center that's working right now, what qualifications do the people who answer the phone have? Is there any are these just volunteers who show up, or are these mental health counselors? Are these people who go through some training? What's the current structure of the program?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Stith. So currently, as we sit today, there is a battery of training requirements that these crisis counselors have to go through. They are not master level clinicians. They are trained specifically in mental health de-escalation, suicidal de-escalation techniques before they can be, it's a long training program that they go through. There are both AA level and bachelor level folks that are working. Most of these folks, specifically one call center, I know that the entire staff is currently in school pursuing their master's degrees in mental health. That's a pretty common gateway for crisis counselors.
Other question? Okay.
Thank you.
Any other public comment? Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Lindsay Simoneau and I represent the Wyoming Counseling Association. The Wyoming Counseling Association echoes everything that Ms. Somerville and WAMSAC has said. We've worked with them very closely on this bill. The reason that I would like to speak with you today is to add also some history as to how we came about the trust fund, specifically our friends over at the county commissioner. During that September revenue committee, though they were neutral on the bill, they did share some feedback of how funding has gone for 911 centers at a county level. And we have learned over the last 30 years that because of different things that we did not see in the 90s, inflation, things of that nature, that many of the 911 centers were considered underfunded. So with the hopes of avoiding repeating that mistake, the trust fund was pursued for the very similar reasons that Andy Somerville shared today. We are concerned that during times of boom and bust, that we will not be there to answer those calls and to rise to that occasion. And so I stand for questions and encourage you to vote yes on this bill.
Okay, many questions for Stefan. But you go ahead. first.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, again, Stefan Johansson with the Health Department, really here to stand for any questions, but if I may, just wanted to throw a brief but sincere kudos to my team at the Behavioral Health Division, specifically Erica Matthews, who has headed up this 24/7 Lifeline management for the past year or so. When you all adjourned out of the session last year, and when the monies were deposited into our accounts to get going on the Wyoming Lifeline being moved to 24/7 operations, the governor articulated to me what a priority this was. And by mid to late June, we were up and operational with the funds that we had, both as was mentioned, grant funding and the appropriation in that unit that has been in the standard budget. So really just want to thank my team at the Behavioral Health Division for making this a priority. And Mr. Chairman, we're agnostic on the funding source. We're happy, it's already been mentioned what we think that breakdown would be for the ongoing Lifeline operations, but happy to stand for any further questions.
So that's my question, Stefan. How much would the annual cost to continue the 988 number?
Mr. Chairman, as was mentioned previously, we estimate around 750,000 a year for the current operations of the Lifeline. As you know, the bill contemplates some additional services which were mentioned, crisis teams. I think that that is mentioned at about 1.2 million per year. There's some uncertainty there, obviously, as was articulated previously. Different communities have different needs, but also different abilities. So we would, if this were to pass as is, and those expenditures were tipped into our budget from what's now a trust fund account, we would basically RFP that type of service to see what
So
various
I'm
communities
curious,
could do.
Going through the criteria and the qualifications for the crisis centers, they seem fairly descriptive, particularly for small communities, in order to complete those programs. And why would we put strings around those, to me, such stringent requirements around the implementation of this for the crisis center?
Mr. Chairman, that's a good question. And as many things are in this health and human service and behavioral health world, problems of scale are much more difficult in Wyoming, especially our small towns, than other places. I do think that's an inherent challenge. Our community mental health centers and other providers know, very similar to emergency services, those are high cost, fixed cost expertise that we just don't have everywhere. So I think with some of the permissive language that's in the bill currently, which we discussed at committee for my department, we may do this, we may do this. I think I'm relatively comfortable with what those flexibilities are, but your point is right on. I don't think this would look the same in every county or every community based on what I know is available and what those scaled up operations would need to look like. But as was mentioned previously, I do think it's a building process. And lastly,
I'm looking at it, says shall, the definition of crisis centers and what qualifications are. That's not very permissive.
Mr. Chairman, what I was referring to, there is shall language there. In terms of some of the subsequent sections of the bill, it's more permissive to the department. I would say, for what it's worth, my intent with this type of service would be to integrate this into the discussions around behavioral health redesign that are ongoing, that you all legislated 2 sessions ago, which really does, prioritize populations and modify or move our behavioral health system, especially our community providers, to retool over the coming years and have different types of providers and services available.
So my question is, where does this language come from? And why wouldn't we kind of give general broad authority to the agency to kind of construct guidelines rather than make it so statutorily restrictive?
Mr. Chairman, I can certainly get into that just a little bit. So there's 2 sections, I think. A crisis center, as defined in this bill, is actually the call centers. And that language comes from best practice on a federal level and what that program has developed into. Certainly the mental health community, WAMSAC very specifically, feels that it's important to make sure that our call centers, as they go through an RFP process, are meeting that standard. So we don't have somebody who's setting up shop with just a telephone that doesn't have the training that they need to and be able to provide those services. So that's the shall piece of the bill. If you look on page 8, it starts to talk about mobile crisis teams. That's where we wanted to make the language incredibly permissible for the department for all the reasons that were articulated. So that can look like whatever that, essentially, whatever that community thinks is a good idea and the Department of Health agrees with.
Further questions? Any other public comment? Seeing none, we'll close public comment. We have a motion. Moved by Representative Sherwood, seconded by Representative Walters. Discussion. Roll call.
Representative Henderson.
Aye.
Representative Larson voted aye via proxy vote. Representative Sherwood. Aye. Representative Stith.
Aye.
Representative Walters. Representative Zwanitzer.
No.
Chairman Nicholas.
No. Okay. Off she goes.